in this brave new world of self-isolation, I think we're all a little bit swamped with just the sheer amount of information that's coming in. I'm sure everyone's noticed just how many articles are posted online every day, and it can all be a little bit much. So I'm delighted to introduce Daphne, who's going to take us through perhaps a little bit of a different way to consume the written word. So if you'd like to take it away, Daphne, thank you so much.
Thanks, Aaron. Thank you. Hello, everyone. And thank you so much for joining this webinar. I hope you enjoy it. I hope we have a good conversation through it. Welcome also to my house. It feels a bit weird to have you here in my spare room, but you're very welcome to be here. We may be joined by my cat at some point, so please don't be alarmed. She's very interested in the topic, so I said that she could come along if she wanted to. So what's going to happen today is I'd like to give you a very brief introduction to Lectio Divina. That's our topic today, Lectio Divina. I'll tell you where it comes from, what it's about, and briefly how it's being used nowadays. And then after that, rather than trying to describe it to you or explain it to you, I'm going to invite you to have a taste of Lectio Divina. So are you up for trying a bit of Lectio Divina? Yeah? Anyone put yes in the chat if you're up for it? Might be a bit scary. It sounds a bit rude actually, doesn't it? Lectio Divina, but it's not rude at all. Okay, after you've, why not, yes, oh good, we've got some of you that are up for it. I'm really pleased about that, thank you. It's also nice to know that you're there and I'm not just talking to myself here. After that, I'd like to talk to you about 5 of the elements that I think are really important in relation to Lectio Divina, the things that I'd like to draw your attention to. And then after that, there'll be a chance for you to make any comments, to ask any questions, start any arguments. You're allowed to disagree if you want. Well, welcome all your comments. So first of all, what is Lectio Divina? Well, it's Latin for divine reading. And it's a very ancient reading practice, a contemplative practice. It's usually associated with the Benedictine monks in the Middle Ages, but in fact, its roots go back much further than that to ancient Greece. So it's a pre-Christian activity. It's a very rich way of reading. In contrast with what I think is quite an impoverished way that we seem to have of reading these days. I don't know about you, but I find myself reading very quickly, very superficially, and with quite low expectations of the wisdom that I might get out of my reading, whether it's a news item or a novel, whatever I'm reading. I sometimes find that it's quite an impoverished reading experience. So this brings us back to a much richer experience. I said that it was ancient, but it's actually being repurposed nowadays. So it's bang up to date in terms of a lot of higher education practice. So there are some university departments and even some whole universities in the States where students are being introduced to their subjects, their disciplines, through a modified version of Lectio Divina. And that's not just humanities students, it's also students in the sciences and in the professions. I should say that this is a secular version of Lectio Divina. Clearly, it does have, as I said, strong connections with the Benedictine practice, but we're talking here about an educational and secular practice. So, what I'd like to do first of all is to share with you a quotation. So coming up on your screen should be a quotation, but I don't see it just yet. Where is it? I've got a little sign that says you cannot start sharing. Ah, here it is. Wow, the delights of Zoom. Okay, so here's the quote, and it's from the memoir Red Dust Road, which is by Jackie Kay. So many of you will know that Jackie Kay is a Scottish poet. She's actually the Scottish Macca. And she wrote her memoir as a way of looking at her identity and her origins. Her birth father was Nigerian, and her birth mother was a Scottish Highlander. And she was brought up by adoptive parents in Dundee. And Red Dust Road is an account of her exploration of who she is, where she belongs, and where she comes from. And I think these two sentences, I think they're rather lovely, actually. They for me, really stand out from the work. And I'd like to invite you, if you would, to read this. So I'm going to ask you to read these words. I'll read them in a minute, and I'll ask you to read along with them yourself. And as you read, I'd like you to notice, is there any word that jumps out at you? Is there something that surprises you? So this is the Benedictine advice, to read with astonished ears. So keep your ears open for anything that seems surprising there. If you do notice a word that stands out for you, a word that surprises you, just pop it into the chat panel and we'll see what comes up. So here we go. You are made up from a mixture of myth and gene. You are part fable, part porridge. And let's see what words jump out at you. Any words there that surprise you? Porridge, 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 yes. Myth, myth and porridge. Mixture, that's an interesting one, yeah. Porridge, fable, porridge, myth, fable. Lovely, okay, thank you for those. Now that you've identified your word, I'd like you to have, I'd like you to consider, well, what meanings does that word have for you? Because as we know, words don't have just denotations. They don't just have the dictionary definition that's fairly fixed and that most of us agree on. They also have connotations. So they'll have particular meanings for you. As I'm looking at made up, I'm thinking that stands out for me, and it reminds me of my friend who is a Liverpudlian, and she always used to say, oh, I'm made up, by which she meant she was delighted or she was very happy. And that seems to be part of the meaning of this for me, that there is a kind of joy, a kind of delightedness in these words. So I'd like you to have a think about what kind of connotations does your word have for you? Perhaps those of you who put porridge, what's coming up for porridge there? Messy, homemade and warm, says Heather. I love that. Any other connotations for porridge? Traditional, yeah. Love it, have it every day. Stodgy, yeah. Corner oats, corn porridge. Healthy, yeah, lovely, okay. What about the people who had myth? What kind of connotations came up for you with myth? Oh, home, that's a lovely, home and nourishing, yeah. Myth, untrue, yeah. History, sacred and mundane. Oh, interesting, yes. Okay, so what I'd like you also to think about is the words that you might not notice, the quieter words. So I didn't notice that anyone said you stood out for them or surprised them. But if you look at the word you, it's there twice. It starts both of the sentences. And it occurs to me that you is used in very different ways. So I might mean you, and I'm pointing at one person when I say it, or I might mean you in the sense of anyone. And again, I think that's part of the layers of meaning here, that it's both about what's particular and what's shared, what's individual and what's general. Have a look now, if you would, at any patterns you can see here. What patterns do you notice? Do you notice any regularities, any variations? So it's prose, it's not poetry, but it is written by a poet, so we could expect there to be some patterns in there. Ah, you are. Yes, you are repeated. So a couple of you have noticed that as a pattern. Yeah, that seems to be a strong part of it. And some alliteration, okay. That's where the beginnings of the words rhyme, as opposed to the ends of the words. And part, yes, it seems to be quite a part of the pattern, doesn't it, that it's part. I notice the pattern of myth and fable, and again made up, because if you pause after you are made up, it says you are a fiction, you are made up. So that seems to be there for me as well. And also the comparison Yes, Natalie Jane Clark, myth and gene, fable and porridge, two things. Yeah, exactly. I love that pattern of where she's balancing those. And it's interesting, isn't it, that myth and fable have something in common. They're stories that we tell to put across a meaning. But gene and porridge, gene is a very scientific word and quite abstract, whereas porridge is very familiar, very stodgy, as someone said. So again, there are patterns there. Okay, last thing I'm going to ask you to do with these words, I'd like you to read them with your whole body. Now, you don't have to take your clothes off for that, although you can if you wish to, of course, as long as you've got the video off. What I'd like you to do is to read the words out loud to yourself. We won't be able to hear you, so feel free to go for it. And I'd like you to notice where in your body do you experience these words. So what about the breath going up? What does that feel like? Do the words touch you? And if so, where do they touch you? Is it in your heart? Is it in your gut? Is it in your big toe? Where do you feel it? Do the words move you? What sense of movement do you have? So I'm going to ask you to do that, and then again, just pop into the chat anything that you notice, anything that happens. So read them with your whole body. Just give that a go. Anything that anyone wants to comment on there, anything happening as you read with your whole body. Myth is a long breath. Myth, ah yes, nice. It's that kind of detail of getting into the words. It makes me smile, my face reacts, says Amanda, lovely. It's about communicating, yeah, yeah. In my chest, the breath, so you're very aware of that. Lovely, great, thank you. I wish we could spend more time with these, but we can't, because I want to go on to just have a look at kind of examining some of the things that were going on there. I'm going to unshare the screen. And that's me back again. Okay, so thank you for doing that. That was lovely that you that you took part in that, and I haven't had a chance to attend to all of your responses there. There were a few things going on there that I'd like to point out to you. One was presence. So I was asking you to be fully present in your reading. I asked you to bring your memories, your associations. I also asked you to bring your bodily presence, so your bodily sensations, your feelings, your emotions. So both being fully present and reading with your whole body takes time. So we had to slow down. There's no, Lectio Divina has no, it just doesn't work if you're skipping and skimming and scanning and jumping from hyperlink to hyperlink, as we often read, scrolling through. You have to spend some time there. Trust, I think, is important here as well. I was asking you to kind of trust the process of reading and to assume that those 17 words would actually have something that meant something to you in them. But when I say reading in a trusting way, I don't mean reading foolishly or gullibly. I mean trusting your judgment about what you might take from them, about if there is any wisdom for you to take, and how you might take that on. And I think if you have all of those four, the presence, the embodiment, the slowing down and the trust, then there's a possibility that something quite exciting can happen when you read. And it's perhaps too much to hope that we've managed that in this short time, but there might have been a transformation. Something about those words from Jackie Kay might have shifted something for you, might have helped you to see something differently, to appreciate something more deeply. And when that happens, I think that's when we move from a text, a piece of reading, as being just a package of information to being a site for transformation, where something might change profoundly. Now, I'm very aware of the irony that I've been talking about slowing down, and here I am in 15 minutes trying to do a speedy overview of Lectio Divina. But I hope that what I've done is to give you just a bit of a taster and hopefully give you an appetite to read more and to find out more about this. One book that I could recommend to you if you want to read more, if you're interested in this, is called The Whole Person. And it's edited by Jane Dalton, D-A-L-T-O-N. and her colleagues. The last chapter is mine, I wrote it, but there are 8 other really excellent chapters in there if you'd like to read a bit more. So that's what I offer you today. I would love to hear any comments. I'd love to know if you have any questions for me and anything you'd like me to respond to.
Right, guys, that was brilliant. Thank you so much, Daphne, for doing that for us today. That's great. Now, I misspoke earlier on when I said people can leave questions in the chat. There's actually a special Q&A button. So you can click that and leave a message. And if anyone has any questions, you can just click on the raise your hand icon and that'll allow you to ask a question directly. Or maybe I can start off with a quick question.
Yeah.
So it seems that Lectio Divina, although you mentioned this is a secular view of the practice, it seems that originally this would have been really quite heavily linked in with religiosity and with, you know, belief in the living word and all of this sort of idea. It sounds like a really good way to indoctrinate someone. Do you agree with that? Have you got any comment on that?
Oh, I think that's a really good comment, and I think it's worth it's worth mentioning that. And remember what I was saying was that it's something about trusting your judgment. So it's not about reading gullibly and saying, yes, I take everything here and I believe everything. It's about trusting that there will be something of value in whatever you read. And that I really mean whatever you read, like, you know, you can read the cereal packet and the porridge packet, and you can find something that might strike you as valuable. But it's about making that judgment. It's not about taking in everything unthinkingly. And yes, it has been associated with doctrine, with religious doctrine, but it's also got a long history, a long tradition of questioning and responding in different ways. So yeah, good point. Anything could become indoctrination, but yeah.
Now we do have one question here, Daphne, from Natalie Jane Clark.
Okay.
Read it word for word here. What is the largest piece of text that you can do this reading with? The second part to that question, Daphne, is what is the recommended amount of text to do this process with?
Okay, well, I always recommend to work with a very small piece of text because of the slowness and because of the depth and the intensity. There's a really interesting researcher a literary researcher called Franco Moretti, and he writes about human readers as opposed to machine readers or computers. And he says that in many ways, machines have the advantage over us because the spectrum of their reading is so much broader. So at the macro level, a computer could read tens of thousands of novels, Victorian novels, and compare them, whereas the human mind just can't take on that volume. And at the micro end of the spectrum, the computer can pay attention to details that might actually be quite telling details, but that we wouldn't notice, or that we would find too tedious to pay attention to. So for example, I don't know, Dickens's use of the semicolon, for example. Now there may well be someone out there in the audience who's doing a PhD on that at this very moment, and that's fine, but most of us would find that not interesting, and we wouldn't be able to pay attention to that. So Moretti talks about the little space in the middle, a little kind of human-sized space, where I think Lectio Divina works, and that's with on a very human level. He calls it the anthropocentric space where this works. So I think, I mean, interesting question, what's the biggest piece of reading? I find that the smaller, the better. So even sometimes just spending time with one word, just sitting with one word and saying, what does that mean? What does that bring up? I mean, I was thinking about the word coronavirus and thinking we're hearing that word all the time, but what actually does that mean? What kind of connotations does that have? Where does that word get some of its different layers of meaning? So yeah, I would recommend always having a small piece of text to think about. Thanks for that question, Natalie.
That's brilliant. Now, I see we have a question from the audience. If we could just go live to Annie, first of all. Oh, Bill's ready as well, yeah? Hello, Annie.
Hi.
Hello,
Hi.
Annie.
Hi. Thank you very much, Daph. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you for choosing such a clever quote. I was wondering, given the current situation, if you felt that we were asked to be doing divine reading in our lives at the moment, because we've literally got to slow down and stop.
Yes, yeah, interesting. And it does seem, I've been speaking to a few people who are saying that there's something more contemplative about all the things they're doing, whether it's their gardening, whether it's reading, whether it's the time they're just spending, that something about this time is encouraging us and in fact forcing us to just focus down in a very contemplative way. And I think that's very much congruent with, that's very much in tune with Lectio Divina. Yeah, really good point.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Annie. I see we've got one from Bill Nicol as well, if you want to pose your question to Daphne. Hi, Bill.
Hello, Bill.
Oh, he's muted just now. Hi, Bill. I think you've got your microphone on mute, just the bottom left. You see a mute button.
Got it now, is that it?
There we go.
Can you hear me now? Ah, great. No, what I was going to say to you, Dad, was, do you find people that use this then read it across to the regular reading, or at least aspects of it?
Yes, yeah.
And to get more from the regular reading?
Yeah, nice question. Yeah, so I think people who begin that practice with perhaps reading poetry, then can discover, as I said, anywhere. So even on a cereal packet, you can find it. I find it very interesting as a way of approaching, if you're reading policy papers or kind of, big kind of statements that seem quite impersonal. Once I try to read them more contemplatively, that's easy for me to say, once I
Yep.
take the Lectio Divina approach, then somehow even the most ordinary piece of the everyday piece of reading can take on some of that quality as well. Yeah, good point. I think it spreads to all aspects of what we read. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Daphne, we've got a few more questions down here. So from Natalie Jane Clark, when did you first come across this reading process?
That's interesting. So I was aware of this way of reading a long time before I came across Lectio Divina. So I studied literature at university, and what we called practical criticism in those days. It was a kind of close reading where you both you bring your own self into your responses when you're reading something. So that was years ago. I mean, that was in the 1970s, I think. So that tells you how old I am. And it was only in more recent years, it was a couple of years ago that I discovered Lectio Divina and saw that some of the processes there were very much akin to the kind of reading that I do. Yeah. I mean, talking about when I was a student, the embodied reading I discovered many years ago, again when I was an undergraduate. There was a time when I was studying English, and as part of that I studied Old English or Anglo-Saxon, and I was working with Professor Clemos, who is a very eminent scholar with Anglo-Saxon, and he wanted to, he was very interested in the poem Beowulf, and he wanted to, people will probably be aware that Beowulf is an old Anglo-Saxon poem about a hero who kills a monster, and then the monster's mother comes back and he kills the monster as well. There's more to that. It's a great work of art, but Professor Clemos was passionately interested in dating Beowulf. I don't really want to go out on a date with Beowulf, although that would have been interesting as well, but he wanted to establish when it was written, and he based his theory on stylistic patterns, and it was pairs of words related with and it's interesting that someone came up in the chat and said they were noticing the and, the two words. And so what Professor Clemos did was he asked me as a humble research assistant to count all the pairs of words connected with and this was my introduction, I think, to embodied reading, because my body was smarter than my mind was. So in my mind I thought, yes, that's fine, I'm going to sit here and read for hours and count all these pairs of words, because in those days we didn't have computers to do it. But my body said, no way, this is not going to happen. And I actually developed conjunctivitis. Don't know if people know that conjunctivitis is a horrible thing where your eyes get really itchy and they glue up, so it made it impossible for me to read. But I think, yeah, that was an embodied response to reading. It's my body saying, no, you're destined for better things than this, Daphne. And it was only very, very recently that I realized the significance of conjunctivitis, because of course, and is a conjunction. So that was how I first came across the embodied reading aspect. Sorry, a long question there. I got caught up in an anecdote. Sorry.
That's brilliant, Daphne. No, thank you for the questions there. I think we've got time for maybe one more here. I'll just go to the next one on the list, which is from Amy Robinson.
Hello,
Do
Amy.
you ever see divine reading used as a tool for mindfulness?
Yes, there are very clear links, aren't there? There's a lovely book called Contemplative Practices in Higher Education, and that has a picture of a tree in it, and Lectio Divina is one branch and mindfulness is another branch, and the two of them kind of interconnect as well. So yes, I think I see that those two again are very congruent, both a mindful approach and a Lectio Divina approach to reading. Yeah, thank you.
I think we've got time for one more quick one, and that's from Sarah. Does listening to audiobooks support this practice or take away from the art of reading for ourselves?
What an interesting question. Well, of course, when we think of the monks in medieval times, they would have listened. You know, reading would have been one person reading, and their brother monks would have listened to them. And so reading was thought of as something you did with your ears, like the with astonished ears that I mentioned from the Benedictines. So there's no reason why an audiobook in itself should go against that. And it might in fact help some people to focus more on the meaning. However, I personally find that audiobooks always send me to sleep, even if it's the most lively and interesting voice and it's the best kind of reading matter. There's something about being read to that kind of keys into being read a bedtime story. So the short answer to that is I don't know, but it would be something very interesting to investigate, wouldn't it? Thank you.
Okay, maybe just one more, Daphne, because we've got a few in here. So yeah. It's from Amanda Rathel. How do children respond to this technique? Do they find it easier or take this approach, easier to take this approach to reading?
Again, a great question. So my work has been mostly with university lecturers who were, so I was helping them to use Lectio Divina as a way of developing their teaching. And they, of course, would be working with adult students. So I don't actually have any experience of Lectio Divina with children. I don't know. I think, again, that's something that would really be worth investigating. That would be a nice research study to look at how children respond. Yeah. So
if there's any students in the attendees list here, then I hope you're paying attention, because there's a lot of good dissertation material being dished out right now.
Indeed, yeah.
Well, Daphne, I just want to say thank you so much once again for agreeing to do this with us today. It's been so interesting. I hope we can all go and take a little bit longer to read through the next article we're going through. So thanks again, Daphne. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thanks to all the people who contributed. I really enjoyed their contributions. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Now, just a final little piece. EICC Live will be back in a couple of weeks, hopefully with another fantastic presenter. And if you, in the meantime, want to tweet or put anything on your socials about it, hashtag EICC, or of course, you can use the new hashtag From Edinburgh with Love. So hopefully see you guys all in a couple of weeks. Take care. And once again, Daphne, thank you so much for this. And I hope we can all take a lot from your wise words today.
Thanks, Aaron. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.